thank everyone here today for coming out to talk about this important subject. There's a reminder that this hearing is currently live on YouTube and Facebook and is also live and being recorded for rebroadcast on CTV, Columbus's government television channel 3. The rebroadcast schedule is available at www.columbus.gov. Let's see here. We are here today to review a handful of draft code amendments to the community noise code section of our city code for feedback and to answer questions. Just to give you a little bit of an outline, for those of you who recall, in November of 2022, we originally held a joint public hearing with Council President Pro Tem Rob Dorans to hear from the community regarding noise and mobile food vendors. At the time, we decided to split up the work into different phases, as both areas of code and legislation are very complex. We spent many months researching, discussing, holding meetings, and reviewing draft code amendments for mobile food vending, and ended with code amendments passed this spring and implementation in May. In front of us today include the first round of code amendments the Public Safety Committee would like for us to review. I know the importance of providing the opportunity for people to have the quiet enjoyment of their home. And certainly throughout this community, as we build density, as we explore, people moving into a downtown area, and quite frankly, being the fastest growing city in the Midwest, this creates challenges that revolve around noise. What is important is that we also implement things that are actually enforced. And so, I have no interest in passing something that neither our police department or health department or anyone else has the inability to enforce. And so it's important as we look at this very complex issue from both a residential and a commercial side of things, that we have the ability to tackle this as a big city would. And so, this is the first of many hearings, and we're looking forward to the opportunity to have a very robust discussion about this and look at what the future of noise code looks like here in the city of Columbus. I kind of said I'm looking through my script, and I kind of just said what I was supposed to say. So I'm ready to begin this journey, and I ask residents and business leaders alike to get involved, give feedback, and keep reaching out to my office to share about our noise-related concerns, issues, and needs. With that, I would like to welcome John Oswald, Senior Legislative Analyst for the Columbus City Council's Legislative Research Office, who will be presenting this evening. I'd also like to thank our department partners joining us this evening to help answer questions and provide feedback are Steve Dunbar, Section Chief for the Zone Initiative. From Building and Zoning Services, Tony Celebrezzi, the Deputy Director. Deputy Director Timothy Williams from Public Safety, along with Assistant Director Bob Stewart. Assistant Chief Bodker and Deputy Chief Myers from Columbus Division of Police, and Edward Johnson, the Assistant Health Commissioner, have joined us here tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to John, and we'll get the presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair Remy. Taking a look tonight at some potential code amendments that have been looked at with input from the administration, the city attorney's office, review by council, and now for review by the public. So just a quick recap from the hearing that we had in November, just kind of set the stage for this as far as noise complaints in Columbus that help flavor the discussion a bit. So as we had discussed then, in the past 10 years, Columbus Division of Police has fielded over 93,400 calls in reference to noise complaints. The vast majority of those complaints are fielded through the police's non-emergency line, 4545. When 911 calls are made, those are routed to 4545 as well. Fewer than 1% of those were officer initiated, so the vast majority were coming from the public. Noise complaints, though, have generally been decreasing since 2012, with nearly 11,000 in 2012 versus almost 7,400 in 2021. I think we ended the last year with just over 6,000. Noise complaints are spread throughout Columbus. And some of the places you would think there would be noise complaints, and others where you may not be the first places you think of. More complaints by far over the years in Police Precinct 4, which covers OSU campus area, the top half of the short north and 5th by Northwest areas. But coming in second and third highest would be the far northeast, out towards New Albany, and far southwest. So noise is a citywide issue. Most common time for lodging complaints for folks was between 11 p.m. and midnight. That's 14% of all calls. 62% of complaints are made between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Almost half of the complaints are on the weekend. Nearly half occur in the summertime. So what we're looking at today is Columbus City Code Section 232911. This covers community noise. There's 7 main parts to the community noise code that cover sound levels for land use districts, prohibited sounds, exemptions, inspection, variance procedures, issuance of orders, and penalty. The main section that we're looking at today has to do with prohibited sounds and filling kind of a gap that had been in our code. So this section, prohibited sounds, subsection C, pertains to the type of sounds that are prohibited and from where they can emanate. Any person is prohibited from making any, quote, unreasonably loud and or raucous noise in such a manner or at such a volume to disturb the quiet comfort or repose of a person of ordinary sensibilities. This is actually pretty standard language that is similar throughout many noise codes in the country, and this applies citywide. It also regulates the use of sound amplification systems, auditory devices, any device that generates sound, and stationary sound sources like standing motor vehicles, industrial equipment, fans, HVAC units, etc. So no person right now can generate sounds from these sources from property zoned residential, quote, in a manner as to be heard from 50 feet beyond the property line from where the sound emanates. When there's 2 or more residential units in one structure, the same thing applies, but there's a limit of 25 feet beyond the property line of the unit. This also applies when there's adjoining residential properties located within 50 feet of each other. The section does not currently address commercial property or non-residential. However, that's one of the main thrusts of the amendments from tonight. The proposed amendments will address prohibited sounds by creating a, quote, red line for these properties, such as currently exist for residential, and do it through additions to the subsection C and small adjustments to definitions and other language. And these changes, additions, are as follows. So what it would do is prohibit the operation of any sound amplification system, auditory device, or stationary sound source from non-residential property that is audible at the property line of a residential unit 100 feet from the property line of said residential property. Within multi-use structures, prohibited sounds cannot be audible within the residential unit of that structure 50 feet beyond the property line of the unit from where it's coming. For adjoining structures, one which contain at least one residential unit, the prohibited sound cannot be audible at a distance of 50 feet onto the adjoining residential unit. These prohibitions regarding the non-residential units would only be in effect from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. 2 other changes of note, specifically because variances are a main part of the chapter. It would eliminate an existing variance for prohibited sounds through the Department of Public Safety. So there's already a variance for excessive noise levels in land use districts obtained through the Board of Health, if you're thinking of a business or manufacturing that may violate the decibel level routinely. But there is also one currently for prohibited sounds that this would eliminate as something of a redundancy, because there's already a permitting process that was outlined in this chapter as well as an exemption a few years back through Rec and Parks and licensing section, who routinely have permitting for private and public property, outdoor things like events, block parties, concerts, that kind of thing. The other thing it would do is raise the penalty for repeat offenders. Right now, a violation of the community noise code remains a criminal offense. A single occurrence is a minor misdemeanor, which essentially is punishable by a fine up to $150. If the offender persists in making loud or raucous noise after a warning or request to desist, the violation is a fourth-degree misdemeanor. The penalty for which would be up to 30 days in jail and a $250 fine. Any subsequent violation is also a fourth-degree misdemeanor. What this change would do is change any of those subsequent repeat offenses from a fourth to a second-degree misdemeanor, which could be punishable by up to 90 days in jail and a $750 fine. Some other smaller amendments just to language and everything. The use of the term audible will be used instead of, quote, in a manner as to be heard, as the former would be more legally objective. Introducing non-residential property into the definitions. Changing the definition of property zoned residential to include property in areas zoned for mixed use. Introducing the use of sound level meters into the code as an enforcement tool that could be used to monitor land use levels or include in possible future use for different kinds of units to collect evidence against offenders. It would include the Department of Building and Zoning Services as a city agency that can enforce the provisions of the sections. Currently, Division of Police and Public Health already have the ability to enforce, and that would remain the same. And it would introduce organizational criminal liability under penalties, which means corporation, limited partnership, similar commercial entity could be found in violation of the section, not just individuals. So some of the writing is kind of small here, but I took a snapshot of just a city comparison of like how some of these, the main thrust of these changes would look in other cities. It's very common for there to be a red line for property of all kinds, both including non-residential and residential. One of the ones where there isn't, Louisville actually has not updated their code in over 45 years, so we're not alone in some respects to that. We have not updated ours in over 20. Penalties are largely civil in places. I think civil is kind of in larger cities is kind of the direction that they're going. Though there are criminal penalties in some of these cities, and they can be relatively harsh and even stronger than ours. For example, Los Angeles starts with a violation of a written warning. A subsequent is an unclassified misdemeanor, but something akin to our first-degree misdemeanor with a possible 6 months in jail. And as well as Seattle, who for public nuisance noise as a criminal misdemeanor could be a $500 fine and 6 months in jail as well. And a lot of the enforcement is done by entities other than police, though police can be included. Typically if they are, there is a specific section of police dedicated to such. Los Angeles started doing this with a noise enforcement team. And that is it for the proposed changes. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I am going to ask if any of our departmental partners have any questions regarding the presentation itself, and then I'll get into some other questions that I might have. I'd like to welcome my colleague, Councilmember Nick Bankson. Thank you for your attendance today. But I'll go ahead and see if you guys have any questions based on the presentation so far. A lot of negative. That's good. So let me ask some of our attendees, what is the status on how Columbus Police, for instance, is handling enforcing noise complaints when issues arise? What issues arise when you do respond to those complaints? So Assistant Chief or Deputy Chief, either one.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy. As you know, the numbers that were cited over the last 10 years are significant. the Columbus Division of Police is always interested in talking about revisions that might aid us in servicing people that call for our officers' help. However, in this case, there are outlying concerns that we take into account when looking at those numbers. Those include the times of day that calls are made, as well as the availability of officers. And I think there might be some opportunity to better service callers, specifically related to noise ordinances or loud noise. I've asked Deputy Chief Tim Myers to take a little deeper dive into the numbers over primarily since 2018, and would like for him to review some of those if you don't mind.
Thank you, Chief Bodker. So one of the challenges that I think was highlighted in the presentation when it comes to enforcing the noise ordinance is the most common time that we get these sorts of ordinance violation complaints is also usually the same time that we are responding to a lot of other emergency calls. As with most police departments in the nation, we have a dispatching priority system, which means that when calls come into the communications center, they are prioritized based on their importance relative to what's going on. So we have 5 different categories. A noise complaint, unless there is some indication that it involves a fight, a disturbance, something more than just the noise complaint, that's going to be a priority 4 call for service. The goal is to have a priority call for service dispatched within 60 minutes. There are times that an officer is not available to respond to the call during that time, and so the Emergency Communications Center will sometimes time out those calls for service, and so an officer is not dispatched. About 20 to 30% of the calls that come into the Emergency Communications Center are timed out and not dispatched to officers. Of the calls that are dispatched to officers, there is a small portion where officers take some sort of enforcement action. Sometimes that is what we would call a Code 1, so issuing a citation, or it could be a Code 3, which is where we make an arrest. That doesn't mean that someone is arrested for the noise ordinance. That means that the police respond, and based on what they assess when they get there, they make some sort of arrest. So the numbers generally over the last 5 years, from 2018 to 2022, about 60 calls resulted in arrest, and about 60 calls resulted in citations specific to noise complaints. You already heard the numbers during the presentation regarding the volume of calls that is accurate based on what we're seeing as well. There has been a slight downward trend over the last couple years, and the precinct information that was highlighted is accurate as well. Looking at a per capita basis, it is also accurate to say that a couple precincts on the west side have a higher volume of noise complaints per capita than some areas of the city.
This one's to Scott. You mentioned back in November that the city attorney's office needs a red line in the noise code to truly participate in these issues. Do these draft amendments in front of us today cover this request? Is there, I said Scott, I don't know why I said that, sorry Steve. Is there anything further needed from your point of view?
Councilmember, I don't think there's anything further needed. I think if I could give a little more context to how I think this works in the real world. So one baseline without question, having a distance standard, I think it will eliminate a tremendous amount of frustration on behalf of residents, on behalf of the business owners, definitely on behalf of patrol officers. I cannot express enough how frustrating it is to have everyone think that they are right or they are wrong without any real objective way to say, hey, here's the expectation for everyone, please. So, before we even get to enforcement, I think just the fairness to business owners who think they're going to be making some noise, the fairness to residents deciding where they're going to buy a place, knowing, okay, here is generally where we expect noise to begin and end would be tremendous outside of enforcement. On the enforcement side, I want to make sure something that you don't see in the four corners of this actual ordinance, but what I think will be the most impactful enforcement mechanism is there's a provision of Columbus City Code. It's 101.08 that says any violation of city code can be cause for the city to file an action for injunctive relief. And basically what that means, and in this, our office uses this all the time, is that if you have, and it's not just, we're not going to file an injunctive action. That's basically a lawsuit that says, hey, you property owner, business owner are violating city code. That is a tremendous tool for our most egregious offenders, whatever the offense may be. And it provides the most, I would say, flexibility and remedies. It provides the most leverage also. So just so everyone understands, when the police say, listen, a lot of these are going to time out, we're not going to have an officer there, I actually don't think that the criminal provisions, there will be time when that's appropriate and officers will take action. From our perspective, I think the most productive use of these changes will be that it lets us identify not the person who was, noise past 100 feet last Tuesday, but the place where we are getting tens and tens and tens of these calls. What that means is we don't have to have an officer respond and cite someone. We were able to look at the history of those calls. And, something that we have tried working out with officers in other instances, okay, maybe you don't have the time to go mark on the run and talk to the person who called and go to the business, but maybe you've got time to drive 120 feet away and just mark in your radio system, I was here, audible music from wherever. So I guess that's the big piece that I would add to this, is that this change from our perspective would not be us, the city of Columbus, asking officers to spend more time enforcing the noise ordinance. I actually think it would be the exact opposite. I think that having a bright line, we'd get a ton more compliance or folks just understanding, hey, that's not a violation. So I think that gets rid of a big swath of them right there. And then I think the other thing is we could do, like we do with a lot of our nuisance abatement cases, our injunctive actions, we could say, okay, gee, we're getting a lot of calls about whatever, bar A. Let's take a look at all the numbers. Okay, last year, 47 noise complaints from bar A. Maybe only half of those officers were dispatched, but they were able to corroborate, yeah, there's noise here. We can go back to it. So I guess that is the one thing I would stress out of all this is, we need that subjective standard just for fairness across the board, for everyone to have expectations that line up. But that would open up a tremendous amount of possibilities, and especially for business owners. And I understand there's some skepticism about this, but in my mind, if I'm a business owner who's going to make noise, I love this because now I know it's not just every neighbor calls I got to sweat. I am able to send my folks out and say, okay, here's how loud we can be, here's how loud we cannot be. So from our perspective, the city attorney's office, this is the right thing to do for all parties involved. The one thing I will say is that 100 feet, that's what we looked at and we see it as representative around the country. I think reasonable minds can have a conversation on exactly where that line should be. That makes sense, but what we will say 100 times over is please just put a line in the code that will be fair to everyone, and the legislative process can work out exactly where that line should fall.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. Edward, how many decibel readers does Columbus Public Health own, and do we need more?
I believe at any given time we've had about half a dozen, so about 6 on hand. Some of them have had to cycle through due to age, but I think for what we have been asked to do, that has been sufficient. But if business is going to pick up, obviously we would probably need more.
And then, Deputy Director Celebrezzi, how does Building and Zoning Services currently interact with noise and noise complaints?
The limitations in our code only apply to demolitions of residential buildings, and it sets up a time in which those demolitions can occur. So.
And go back to police for a second, just because we know over the course of the last few years, especially during COVID, vehicle and auto noise, music, spinning their tires, things like that, they've been a big problem. What have you seen from a violation standpoint? I know we've done some operations to try to tackle this issue, but what's the status of that? And, from your perspective, where we're at today?
Thank you, Councilmember Remy. So there is a separate traffic code that's filed in environmental court that we use for vehicle noise typically. And looking at the annual report from the municipal clerk, we can see that there was a dip in that in 2020, which corresponded to the dip that we saw everywhere else. And then enforcement of that has ticked up in the last year.
Deputy Director Williams, do you have any comments about, kind of from the public safety perspective as a whole?
I would probably just mention, that, noise is often cited by residents, as one of the biggest issues impacting their quality of life. And in some instances, it is a potential, safety concern. I think the proposed amendments here, they focus on increasing accountability, streamlining the permitting and enforcement process used by the city, and ultimately look to bring, clarification, to internal procedures and enforcement responsibilities. So I think, looking at it from that perspective, we can, through some of these measures, improve the quality of life of the residents and, improve safety.
Thank you very much. That's really all the questions I have. I know we've got about 10 speakers that we want to get through. I will ask my colleague, Councilmember Bankston, if you'd like to say anything.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Remy. One question I was sitting here, and I don't know if the city attorney or who can answer it, but when measuring and thinking about noise, I think from a small business standpoint, I take a bar or restaurant or a club that we know what the music is. How are we determining the difference between, say, the direct noise, right, i.e. music or that, versus indirect, meaning crowd noise, right? The crowd may be louder one day, or you may have more folks than less folks than that day. Like, how are we distinguishing that? Is there a way to think about that? I know that you said 100 feet, but that probably combined with, say, speakers or other noises could amplify that. So just wanted to see if there's a way to make that distinction.
Sure. So a couple things. The code as it's written now defines noise from an auditory sound source that has to be a machine of some sort. So we're talking the machines. What I would tell you, and this is just anecdotally, but probably I would say the last 15 years or so of doing this, that we have never had someone complain of crowd noise that we have even begun to go down the road of thinking that is an actionable item. I literally cannot think of a time when it was anything other than the music. When we got to the point where it was some distance away. So, and the other thing is, when we talk about, well, what is causing the noise, when we talk about a distance standard, you are going out, what do you hear out there? Generally speaking, it could even look like, I hear the song. I drive by the place, it's the song. So practically speaking, from our perspective, when we're talking about noise that is heard over a distance from a club, exactly what that may be, or a bar or any other sort of business, practically speaking, the amplified sound is what we're talking about, meaning the mechanically amplified sound, the speaker noises, the music.
And thank you for that. And Deputy Director Celebrezzi, I know this has come up before in some other rezonings that we've done. Are we thinking about, as the city continues to grow, continues to densify, best practices around materials that we see in other parts of the country that can be used as part of the building code when we think about these newer type of developments?
The state building code does provide for different materials that they consider more sound insulation as far as residential units that are being built. However, there are no set requirements at this point, either at the state or I should say parameters in which those types of materials are forced to be used. It's usually at the developer's discretion or the builder's discretion as to whether they want to use it. We have done it in a couple of locations in town in order to get the builder, in order to get through the review process and through Development Commission and ultimately here before council, agreed to do certain types of sound mitigation practices on a couple of projects in the past year and a half.
I got to turn the mic on. Thank you very much, Councilmember. I appreciate your insight and comments, questions. Are there anything else? Is there anything else from the group that anybody has forgotten or would like to? All right. Well, we've got, like I said, we have 10 public speakers this evening, and we've received 6 pieces of written testimony, which will be passed along to my colleagues. I'm going to call everybody's name and tell you who's up next so you can be ready so we can move through this expeditiously. So the first person to speak is Jackie Martin. You'll state your name, address, any organization you may represent. You have 3 minutes to speak. On deck is Tyler Poole. Thank you.
This is Jackie Martin. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. My comments are actually maybe more residential, so may not be appropriate for this hearing, but there were 4 points I wanted to make. The residential land use properties is very confusing. In social media, when people like neighborhood, next door neighbor, when people say there's music, what can I do about it? Most of the time they're told, well, you can't do anything unless it's between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. and a certain decibel level, which seems to conflict with the other sections here. So I think a lot of people where I live are just very confused. They're being told they can't do anything about noise when it's during the day or evening. They can only do something between 10 and 7, which I don't think is true. So maybe there needs to be some clarification of what is residential land use properties. I think people are reading that first section and think it applies to all residential areas. Maybe you need some examples. If land use properties residential does apply to like my neighborhood, then it seems to be in conflict with Section C. And my next point, I really have problems with the red lines, as you call them. Now, you're talking about commercial areas, and I understand that, but still, a commercial area can move into next door to me. I can't do anything about it. All of a sudden, I can't do anything about their noise. Even noise from my neighbors. My neighbor is 9 feet away from me. So she could blast her music and I could hear it all the way through my house because she's allowed to make loud music as long as it doesn't go beyond 50 feet. But my house is within that 50 feet. So I have a lot of problem with these red lines. I don't really understand why the 50 feet, the 25 feet. It just leads to a whole lot of noise that I can't do anything about because my house happens to be within those limits. I'm struggling a little bit with section C3 and section D because it kind of sounds like the church that's a couple houses down from me could go ahead and blast music without a permit. and I can't really do anything about it if I'm within 100 feet. That sounds like my time is up.
Thank you very much, Ms. Martin. You're welcome to send us any additional testimony that you might have. We'll gladly receive it and try to have my team or somebody from research get back to you. Our next speaker is Tyler Poole from the Wood Companies. If you could come up. And next on deck is Stephanie Wolfe.
Hello, council members. Thank you for convening this meeting. We are very eager to deal with this issue. My name is Tyler Poole. I've lived and worked in the neighborhood for close to 10 years. Noise emanating from late night establishments has deteriorated the quality of life for those living on High Street or close to it. While we appreciate Mr. Dunbar's work on this, and we've had a meeting with him almost a year ago, the current legislation we feel does not adequately address the issues of noise for those living on High Street. And I, as an aside, I get it. This is there's a lot of scenarios to come up with to, deal with noise on all types of uses. But the 50-foot buffer for adjacent buildings is really just too much. It ignores kind of the urban condition. So everyone knows an urban environment will be louder than the suburbs. However, almost every bedroom wall on High Street has a window that lets sound in. And every bedroom, these bedroom windows are, for the most part, on property lines. So if a person is sleeping in their bedroom, on their property line bedroom, there will be an untenable noise from a bad neighbor that exists 5 feet from the property that doesn't make it 50 feet onto the property. And that, bad neighbor could blast music, and it would have to go through, 3 or 4 sets of demising walls to get to 50 feet, the way these apartments are laid out. So, with that being said, if the goal is to maintain and improve the quality of life for residents, the 50-foot buffer really just doesn't do this. And, I feel a more adequate solution would be to ensure that no noise enters an apartment premises from an adjacent building. I get in the same building, that's got to be a landlord issue that, a restaurant has noise go up. I understand that has to be, dealt with. That's not really the city's problem. But, I think, we look forward to seeing a solution on this and, perhaps a more strict policy for noise emanating after a certain hour. Kind of breaking down the 10 p.m. or make a 1 p.m. There has to be no noise emanating from something. We look forward to being part of the solution and to tackling soon the issue of moving vehicle noise. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tyler. We appreciate you coming in. Stephanie Wolfe and then Layla Javidi on WebEx. So please state your name, any organization may you represent. You have 3 minutes.
My name is Stephanie Wolfe, and I live on Auburn Avenue in the Franklin Park neighborhood. And I just wanted to voice my support for the C3 amendment, which prohibits the amplification of sounds from a non-residential property that are audible at any residential unit at a distance of 100 feet or beyond. My neighborhood is a perfect example of a residential area that's been impacted by this. We've been subjected to excessive noise from the HVAC unit at the Mid-Ohio Behavioral Health Building at 1515 East Broad. It emanates a high-pitched whining noise 24 hours a day, 6 months a year, unless the temperature happens to fall below 60 degrees. The sound is disturbing, it interferes with sleep, and literally our ability to enjoy our own yards and neighborhood. The sound carries for blocks, and it can be heard as far away as the other side of Franklin Park and across Broad Street behind the high school in the Woodland Park neighborhood. Repeated complaints from the neighbors to the owners of the buildings, which is 1515 East Broad Holdings LLC, have been ignored. This includes a petition signed by the neighbors and sent to the LLC by registered letter last year. It also includes a closing remark included in a letter sent to the LLC by Sarah Badenhop at the Environmental Health Division, which noted that even though the noise generated falls just below the acceptable decibel unit that's acceptable according to code, that given the impact it's had on neighbors, she hoped that they would empathize and correct the problem, which is literally probably just fixing their HVAC. So at this point, you can walk halfway through Franklin Park and hear a high-pitched whining noise. And that's kind of another issue that I hope further amendments would address, would not only be decibel level, but also frequency or pitch, because it's loud, but it's also, you know, high pitch. And I'm going to email you actually today. I have videos of that document this. So I do support this amendment and really hope that this passes and is enforced, because it'll help all of our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolfe. We appreciate you. Leila Javidi and then Jean Billick. What? Oh, great. Next up is Jean Billick. Noted that Lila is not on WebEx. Lila. And then Mark Wood, you're next. I can say that name.
Hi, Councilman Remy. I'm Jean Billick, and I live at 51 North High Street. I live on the 7th floor, and I appreciate all the work that's been done about the commercial noise, because I know that's important. But I'm here to talk about the noise from the cars and the motorcycles, and that's on High Street in the middle of the night. And I'm talking about this unusual noise that comes because apparently the cars or motorcycles have been altered, their parts of their engines or whatever. I really love living here downtown. I recently bought a condominium there, and there's lots of festivals, and it's great life. I'm a member of Downtown Residents Association, but I found that this noise in the night is indeed a problem. I'm not a light sleeper from a family of 6 children, and I live on the 7th floor. So I was really surprised that this was so bothersome, but indeed it really is. I've tried like remedies, earplugs, blah, blah, blah. But I kept a little log over the past week of exact times when I was woken up in the middle of the night. And I have the log in detail on what times, but on Sunday on the 9th from 1:30 to 2:30, there were motorcycles, cars revving, engines running down, coming back. And on Tuesday, following Tuesday at 10 to 10:30, on Wednesday at 11 o'clock, on Thursday at 9:30 until midnight, and on Saturday from 1 o'clock in the morning until 3:30. And so my little log went through 8 days, and I had 3 peaceful, uninterrupted nights sleeping. And that's about 60% of the time I'm disrupted. So, and I know it's a goal of the city to help the city to recover from COVID and develop it into a place where you can live and also work. But Columbus streets are uncongested at night, so this has just turned into a raceway. That is the best I can guess. It's not like New York where it's so congested you can't turn it into a raceway. And anyway, and I appreciate, as I said, I appreciate your work you're doing, but I do see that there are laws on the books that can prevent this by traffic monitoring in the night. And so it's the enforcement of these laws that needs to be given consideration. Or we can put speed bumps on High Street. I'm not sure how that will work. But anyway, I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ms. Billick. I appreciate your time as well. Mark Wood, and then Victoria Cavendish.
Thank you, council members. We have been talking to many of you for as long as 4 years, expressing concerns about noise pollution and how late-night activities are negatively impacting our neighborhood. We have asked you to pass common-sense noise policies that better allow nightlife to respectfully interact with our mixed-use neighborhood, the most densely populated residential neighborhood in the city, that being the Short North. The success of the Short North has largely been established on 2 foundations. First is with dense and quality housing, and second, as a destination retail corridor made up of small mom-and-pop retailers, galleries, and restaurants. I hear feedback from our small businesses that the news about late-night activity has tarnished the reputation of the neighborhood and that many of their patrons are now reluctant to come to their shops. The transformation of the neighborhood has been a grassroots effort. It has not been an easy journey. It has required commitments from stakeholders over decades. As hard as it is to build up a successful urban community, it can quickly be torn apart. My father, who some have named the godfather of the Short North for his early leadership in the neighborhood, regularly preached of the dangers of how a neighborhood can be taken over by late-night bars and nightclubs that come to profit from areas like the Short North after they become successful, undermining the commitments that made it successful in the first place. Over the past several years, we have seen the number of bars and nightclubs more than double. Bars and nightclubs have a place in the neighborhood, but it is critical that they respect individuals who live in the buildings adjacent to these establishments. Almost every negative story that comes out about the Short North is about crime that happens in the early morning hours. Noise radiating from nightclubs and bars, and bar patrons loitering around late-night food carts who serve drunken and noisy patrons has become the weekend norm. The backdrop has attracted ATV vehicles, cars, and motorcycles that cruise High Street, revving their engines with music blaring. The late-night atmosphere has become a backdrop for street confrontations, resulting in fights that have led to deadly violence. None of you would want this type of activity to take place outside your homes. We need the city to act now. We need a noise ordinance that requires establishments to keep noise confined to within their four walls. That's a policy that we put in all of our leases. It's a common sense policy. And we need policies to keep others from flooding the streets with noise. The fundamentals of a successful mixed-use neighborhood depend on an enriched residential experience, and that experience is being undermined. Please, please, please pass legislation now that requires businesses that come into the neighborhood to be respectful of the residents that have made the neighborhood their home. These residents have been here a long time. Bars have happened over the last couple of years in numbers. We are at crossroads and have a responsibility to preserve the years of work, dedication, and care that have gone into making the Short North a special community where consumers feel safe patronizing businesses and where people want to call home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wood, Victoria Cavendish, and John Esterly after that. Looks as if Victoria is not here. John Esterly.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is John Esterly. I am a lifelong Ohioan, and I've been here in Columbus for the last 24 years. Today, I'm here to act as a representative of the 934 Gallery, which is ironically enough located at 934 Cleveland Avenue in the Milo Grogan neighborhood. For nearly a decade, our gallery has been the forward-facing representative of the Milo Grogan arts community. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and every member of our board and staff volunteers volunteer their time to keep our gallery running. While certainly not unique, the team at 934 prides itself on hosting artists that might not have an opportunity elsewhere. Many of our installations include artists in their first formal showing. Our annual mural gallery often features local artists creating their first large-scale project. And our summer music series and 934 Fest, shameless plug, September 8th and 9th, feature an eclectic mix of up-and-coming musicians playing the same stage as established favorites. We are proud to share that our Pay Your Artist campaign sets aside money from our operating budget to guarantee that every artist who shows on our space and every musician who joins us on our stage receives a minimum payment for their time. Many of the noise code changes proposed in committee will make planning easier. Shifting the permitting process to the special events section of the Department of Recreation and Parks will streamline requests, as these folks already have jurisdiction over many of the other aspects of event planning. However, we are concerned that changes to the mixed-use noise requirements could expose properties like the one we call home to more stringent regulation and require more frequent special event permit requests. Since we've got the books cracked open, we are humbly asking that the council provide a mechanism for nonprofit organizations like ourselves to request permits at a reduced or waived fee for events that are free and open to the public. Throughout the year, we offer musical performances, gallery events, movies, and more, all for no charge and open to the neighborhood. With current permit fee structure, if we host even 1 or 2 events a month, the annual cost of these permits would be in the thousands of dollars. Allowing reduced or waived fees for free events hosted by nonprofit organizations would allow groups like 934 to continue providing opportunities for our communities without fear of noise violations if our fund stretches past the allowable window. Thank you again for all the work you're doing, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Mr. Esterly. We appreciate your comment today. I have Doreen Yuha Sauer and Joe Savarese. So that is all of the public speakers that we have this evening. Are there any final comments for the record from our departmental partners? Any additional question or comments from my colleague? All right. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us today. As you can hear, there's lots of elements to this. We will continue to have this dialogue between my office and my colleagues. We welcome people to reach out to us and send any additional comments that we have before we take up this first part of legislation. It's obviously been a robust conversation over our noise code amendments. No legislation will be coming before Columbus City Council before recess, but we felt it was important to share where we were in our research and internal discussions regarding the Columbus Noise Code and gather feedback. Thank you to John Oswald for your presentation and work on the Noise Code amendments, and thank you to our city departments for attending today. Thank you to the council team members who made today's hearing possible. I'd like to thank my colleague, Councilmember Nick Bankston, for being here, and then my team, Lucy Frank, Kaylin Pittman, and Mark Carter, and the CTV team for their assistance in preparing for this hearing. And last but not least, I want to thank you, the stakeholders and residents who attended today for our outreach and in between hearings and meetings. I hope you all stay safe and have a great evening, and this concludes today's hearing.